the Crimean Ukrainian cities. One day, Russian Black Sea Fleet turns to be the occupational fleet. One day, they took under the control, you're absolutely true, all the infrastructure, all the, let's say, institutions and governmental bodies in Crimea. That's a real story. But who signed the agreement and actually the extension of the agreement for Russian Black Sea Fleet to stay in Crimea in 2010?
Of course,
that's the actual, let's say, reason what happened and why happened in this way in Crimea.
I agree with you. I think Russia is very good champion in long-term planning.
Yeah.
What always shocked me is when I start to dig a little bit information about all these Donetsk and Lugansk things, and when I saw that the organization called Donetsk Republic was created in 2005 already.
Oh, yeah.
By gentlemen who are still having an active role, although they disappeared at one moment, like Mr. Purgin. We speak about 2005. Why 2005? Because the Orange Revolution had happened. And after the Orange Revolution, Uncle Putin thought, Jesus, that's not good for me. So this is long-term planning. So I personally think Ukraine had zero chance in Crimea, because this was not organized in February. This was organized 10 years ago.
It was activated
ready
in February.
It was just
it was a plan that was already in place, and it was activated.
So I think Ukraine had zero chance.
Agree?
Well, they were told by the international community not to oppose it. They were strongly advised by European and America to not offer military opposition. We're informed now, according to the records at the time.
Yes, but Ukraine knows that Crimea is a problem since 1992 at least.
And what did they do?
Nothing.
Yes.
Nothing.
Yes.
They were completely infiltrated. Ministry of Defense was totally infiltrated. Your organization was totally infiltrated.
Absolutely.
We had Russians who were having government positions. Minister of Defense and other people. There was no Russian Ukrainian army in 2014. There was no. I went to Lugansk next to Milovi in March. There were kids staying there with 2 degrees, with summer clothes. And at that time, the inhabitants of Lugansk was cooking and preparing food for them and giving them clothes. It was kids, it was not an army. So
Couldn't they have done something between 2004 and 2010 during the period after the Orange Revolution? That's when maybe
That
you
would have
could
been the
focused.
moment. That would have been the time. But the situation in Crimea was very much like my understanding was always like they just left it be. We're not going to disturb you, so don't get too upset about what we're doing, because we're not going to disturb you either. And it was autonomous in a very real sense, not just in a technical sense, but in a day-to-day sense. And you speak to people from Crimea, they're not surprised about the ease in which the takeover took place, unfortunately. Could Ukraine have offered military opposition at that time? I think it would have been extremely unlikely to have been successful. Maybe you could argue that it might have prevented the escalation into East Ukraine afterwards. It might have made the Russians think twice. I think certainly the ease of Crimea encouraged them to go into East Ukraine, because they said, well, they're just going to roll up. They're just going to roll over. They're going to give up again. And that was presumably the assumption, the calculus in the Kremlin. But in terms of the military possibilities, they were extremely limited, I would say, in February, March 2014.
But coming back to today, Russia is very difficult to deal with and understand it. I mean, what we're doing in Aleppo in Syria is unexplainable.
Total mess.
And the international community cannot do anything, and cannot deal with it. So basically, I think that Donbass is Ukraine's problem, above all and first of all. And Ukraine has to find a way. First of all, to respond honestly. Do we want the people back, or do we want the territory back?
Recognize, yeah.
If you only want the territory, we understand that it won't work. You have to get the people back.
Absolutely.
Then if you want to get the people back, you have to have a plan how to do it.
Absolutely.
Agree.
So you are just from there. How do you get them back? How do you get back that boy that you met in a hotel, who is educated and smart?
This is the most scaring thing, how to get back the young people, because also I remember last year we were in Donbass Palace, and they had this, how do you call it, Opускnoi, when you finish university. So there we meet young people, bright young people who studied, who speak language, English, German, And it was one of my biggest moments of depression when we asked one young guy, so what do you want to become? He said, I want to become a diplomat. I asked him, oh, where? Ukraine, in Russia? He said, no, here. I said, what do you mean here? He said, here in Donetsk. I said, what type of diplomat you want to become in Donetsk? Well, first I want to work in the embassy, and then my dream is to become foreign affairs minister. And then you understand how difficult this whole stuff is going to be. I have not the slightest clue, but I know that for sure you need to work with those people. There's still a lot of people coming in and out. I personally think that you need to find a way to make the in and out somehow more difficult, because unfortunately what you say is not totally correct. There are people who are coming back and having 1 feet now on Ukraine-controlled territorium, restart their occupied territorium business again. So I think that the efforts need to be channeled to really encourage people who have good minds to restart their life in their hometowns, and to be very tough, not to let a situation happen. Again, it's with time. You get used to everything.
You're punishing the people of the whole region, and a lot of them are living now in territory which is controlled by Ukraine. A lot of people left behind family members, business interests, all kinds of reasons. They have to be able to go back and forth. And if they can't go back and forth, they get more and more angry with Ukraine.
I don't say that you should not go back and forth, but by allowing to sit on 2 chairs, it makes a return more difficult. I was before...
Gulliver, I'll tell you one thing. I mean, obviously, everybody talks about it, nothing new. But if Ukraine started building a state and a society which is more similar to Baltic states, to Poland,
Of course.
it would get rid of...
Corruption and everything.
Of course.
it would become more attractive.
Yes.
Of course.
Yes, but that's Ukraine's plan anyway, isn't it? I mean, I would hope.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
It needs to become reality and not a plan. This is the
So then-
biggest issue.
You see here is today's New York Times. Here is an article written by Mikhail Saakashvili, Ukraine corruption unbridled. Yeah? And he says, I mean, we know the story because we live here and we hear him quite often, but in his article he says that basically Ukraine is very similar to Russia.
The elite is the same as
In the elite,
That's what I say,
obviously.
absolutely. The system
The
is
elite
the
is,
same,
it's a corrupt system, you know, and it's very difficult to systems which are similar, you know, to find sort of, you know, kind of a solution which is civil. No, I don't, it's very difficult. Ukraine has to become different. No, and if Ukraine will not become different, it will be very difficult
That's for
to
sure
get them
a
back.
threat to our national security. And corruption, let's call it, it's actually killing and shooting into the backs of our soldier, and let's say deprive us of any possibility to restore peace and our national security and territorial integrity. But that's
Well,
really
but
dangerous.
the president said we have 2 wars, one on the east and one against corruption.
And
And the one against corruption is even more.
It would have been a good idea to start fighting corruption on a local level in the east so that there would be no corruption on the checkpoints coming in and out of the DNR on the Ukrainian side. I remember one time going from Donetsk to Mariupol when I was still allowed in Donetsk. First thing we see after we hit the highway coming out of the separatist-held territory is Ukrainian traffic cops who want to get a bribe from people. What kind of symbol does that show to people coming out of Donetsk into the new Ukraine, which is cracking down on corruption? It's exactly the same as before, perhaps even worse. And they,
You know, I'll tell you, when I worked in Russia, I had a lot of arguments because, you know, I covered Afghanistan from the Mujahideen side. So I was not very well accepted among, say, the KGB elite, put it that way, even post-Soviet. And we argued, you know, I said, you lost the war not because Stingers arrived, because you were selling your weapons to Afghan resistance. You were super corrupt.
Yep.
You were selling weapons which were killing your own soldiers. There was absolute corruption in the army. That's why you lost the war. And here you have a situation which is sort of not great.
That's a good point. I think that the anti-corruption efforts would be best focused in the area that's closest to the conflict, where they could have the biggest impact. And also, I think there's an argument that local level anti-corruption efforts have a better chance of succeeding than on the national scale. But again, that was probably the idea with Saakashvili in Odessa, of course, and that didn't work out as they would have hoped, as he would have hoped, as we would have hoped.
On the international stage, I agree with you. I think that's the best thing Ukraine could do right now to promote itself, is to seriously tackle corruption. And look at the United States that spent so much money on anti-corruption projects here, police reform and things like this that have failed.
Jason, but look what's happening. Okay, Saakashvili, Dekonoidze, the police chief, out. All those young, enthusiastic Maidan supporters like Mustafa Nayem were not allowed anymore to represent the ruling party abroad, etc., etc., etc. We have so many signs that all that has been a show and it does not continue.
I think anti-corruption can only work when you really get the impulse from the top of the country. And when I see what happened again, I was unfortunately in Donetsk when you had your e-declaration talk show, it is all going around, and again, Ukrainian press is responsible in this field also. It is all going around, if this is legal, what is done on the top, or if this is not legal. No one is asking the question, is it ethical or not ethical? Right. Yes, it is legal that the president doesn't need to declare his villa in Spain. It is legal, because he declared the company who owns the house in Spain. Bingo. But is it ethical? This is the question. It's the same with the Panama Papers. I'm sure that what he did and his lawyers did was legally fine, because he has a lot of experts around him finding him the legal solution. But I always see the question is wrong here. No one is putting it. Is it ethical? Is an offshore company ethical? Is a house in Spain ethical? I think this is the question.
Yep. Well, we'll leave it open for today. Thanks a lot. Our time is up. See you next week.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.